Yeah, okay, then let's start then. Yeah, hello to everyone. I welcome you to the second seminar of the summer school of the University of Rojava Institute for Social Science in collaboration with the University of Bremen, Germany. And CSCUNES based in Paris, formed in Paris, the organization that is organizing solidarity and cooperation with the universities in North and East Syria. Today we will be discussing the topic that we will be discussing with three guests is decolonization in Kurdistan and beyond, theory, methodology, and practice. I will be moderating. My name is Yasin, and I'm a member of both, aside from what I'm doing in here in Europe, I'm a member of CSCUNES and University of Rojava as well. And we had a very good kickoff seminar yesterday with the participation of Havin Güneşer. And today we will be having our second seminar. Just before I start presenting the guests today, the presenters today, I just want to say that there's interpretation, Kurdish, English interpretation available. I will tell this in Kurdish as well. Havalnom bkhairat nadisa tane من خست از بینم زمان کو ورگارا کردی انگلیسی هیا und دکارن لسر اکران خوال جر قطية interpretation لقطية جهاني ده لور ورگارا کردی انگلیسی گهدار بکن. Yes, so today's first presenter is Ercan Ayboğa. Hi Ercan, welcome. Ercan is a long activist of the ecology movement of North Kurdistan, Southeast Turkey, and Ercan's profession is, Ercan is originally an environmental engineer, and he was one of the co-founders of the initiative to keep Hasan Cave alive, which has struggled 20 years against the destruction of Hasan Cave and the construction of Ilısu Dam in North Kurdistan. Ercan is currently a co-founder of the co-founder of the Mesopotamia Ecology Movement, which was founded in 2012, which is an umbrella organization for ecology activists from North Kurdistan. And Ercan is currently representing this organization on international level. He's also the co-author, one of the co-authors of the book Revolution in Rojava, which has a relatively good success, actually, translated into 10 languages. Ercan will be talking about today's topic is for Ercan is basically he will be talking about his experiences as the member of Mesopotamia Ecology Movement. Before I pass on Ercan, I just want to say that if you have questions, please write in Q&A box. And we will be collecting the questions and asking the presenters. So there won't be Q&A right after each presentation, but we will be doing this we will be collecting all the questions. Secondly, if you have any other issues, please just write in the chat box or in Q&A box. Yes, Ercan, the floor is yours. Please go ahead.
Rojvash, Evarvash, hello to all of you. Thank you for the invitation to speak here, to be able to say some words here. Yes, first I would like to make a kind of introduction to the theoretical political introduction, not big, but to understand the framework of the practice, which I also want to describe. The first discussions on ecology and autonomy started in the 90s already in the Kurdish freedom movement, but just after 99, when Öcalan was kidnapped to Turkey through an international plot, the discussions became more systematic, initiated again by Öcalan. A new big discussion on rethinking and reorganizing has started in 1999-2000, and then followed many years where the movement discussed so many things. There were so many questions on very different levels, and the aim of the discussions was to democratize the movement much more, to increase participation of the people, of the million people who were sympathizing with the movement, and to strengthen the locality. It means, in other words, the autonomy. It was based on self-criticism of the own practice and their own goals, deep criticism. One was to say, okay, we don't want a Kurdish national state. Another was our structures are not democratic enough. And the other one is to say, understand the new discussions, movements, and changes in the world. But doing this, reformism was rejected and analyzed a set of former revolutions, revolutionary practices has been done. New thinkers, current thinkers globally have been analyzed, and many international former new movements have been also discussed. Especially the the social ecology theory was important. I remember very well when we discussed in northern Kurdistan, Turkey, social ecology, and there were a lot of discussions. And however, the one point was to say also, in order to achieve these goals, the civil society is central and has to become the main actor. Until then, was, let's say, more in the focus was the armed struggle in the mountains and the popular uprisings. However, in 2005, Öcalan declared democratic confederalism, a new concept of this for the Kurdish question. It has three pillars. Very shortly, I would describe them. The first is democracy, or better, radical democracy, where society is built up from bottom up by overcoming parliamentarism, the bourgeois democracy we have in many states all over the world. Stronger social movements is also part of it. Second point is the gender liberation, means especially the women's movement. This is considered as a main contradiction, elementary for all structures of the Kurdish freedom movement. If you want to achieve freedom and overcoming exploitation, this has to become central, and it has become central. And the third point was ecology. At that time, let's say the weakest, and many were surprised when Öcalan said you have to also have an ecological society. I remember well at that time where the few ecologists in Kurdistan said, oh, what is this? We were happy, but the most said, okay, what is this? We don't understand what it means really. And ecology shortly means a new relation to the nature, new concept. a new way of producing and consuming, very shortly, but this means anti-capitalism for us. I don't want 2-3 points about what the discussions on ecology. One says destruction of the nature starts when patriarchy came up it starts at that point, not with capitalism, but capitalism made it extremely it makes it in an extreme way, the destruction and exploitation of the nature. And it's all these patriarchal hierarchical systems aim or implement the domination over the nature. And the harmony with the nature, which was existing until the Neolithic, has been destroyed. We say things like we are part of the nature in order to emphasize it. We have a big disconnection to the nature. That's why we have this. We have an alienation to nature. We have an alienation between humans. We say we have to seek for a new relation with the nature and respect, and where only the real needs are taken from the nature. This is connected again to radical democratic society, which only can say what real needs are. However, our conclusion is that we need a change of all relations in our society in a radical way. So after this discussion, which was done in 2007, reorganizing of the Kurdish freedom movement in North Kurdistan has started. The Democratic Society Congress, DTK, has been founded at that time. The social movements became stronger, among them, of course, the women movement, youth movement. Our movements have been set up new if they didn't exist on health, education, justice, beliefs, and so on. Neighborhood councils have been established in many neighborhoods of North Kurdistan as a form of direct democracy, and all were connected in the Democratic Society Congress, where all the movements had to have to deal with each other. Also, we as ecologists are part of it. However, this new structure makes the movement again stronger, because we had now a clearer perspective, new one, and after long discussions, which made us stronger in our argumentation and acting. So in 2010, an emphasis on communality and an economy of solidarity has been done. Big discussions came up. You must consider that at that time, we had already 11 years of local administration in many Kurdish cities. So there was a practice in ruling a city. Also, the opportunities given by the state were very limited. Also, there was always a repression. There was a practice, and it was not always good or not good enough for us. We didn't want a social democratic municipality practice. We wanted a revolutionary one. Just after these discussions, the economy movement has been set up around 2011 or so. Just 1 year later, 2012, our movement, the Mesopotamia ecology movement, has been founded. It's all in a period where the big discussions came up, which discussions became deeper and broader, and results came up. Not only the discussions, but we also started to found many new structures. The economy movement started to set up after discussions of 2 years, first cooperatives in 2013. They started to set up slowly. until 2016, I guess there were around 40 cooperatives in North Kurdistan. You must consider that at that time the economy was, let's say, growing in the Turkish state. There was a lot of money, still a lot of money, and extreme neoliberal policy was practiced, and it spread also to North Kurdistan. It was very difficult to set up cooperatives, even on the basis of the Kurdish freedom movement. Kurdish freedom movement had, let's say, 60% of the people behind itself, but nevertheless, it was very difficult to develop alternative forms of economy, even at a very small scale. In these years, our movement, the ecology movement, did a lot of actions, campaigns, but in 2015, we started to say, okay, we must go over to alternative projects. One was to collect seeds in North Kurdistan before it is lost, because industrial agriculture was spreading. This meant destruction of existing economic structures on a big scale, and was very crucial for us. 2 years later, we were able finally to set up our first cooperatives in North Kurdistan, agricultural cooperatives. There are some, not many today, because since 2015-16, we have a big repression in North Kurdistan. We set up also a cooperative on tree planting. We have a deforestation for many decades, destruction of forests, and one big, let's say, activism is to fight against big destructive infrastructure projects like dams, mining, shopping, big shopping malls, etc. Another one is to fight against the war, which is destroying the nature of Kurdistan in extreme way. We never should forget the war when we speak about ecology. We say when we fight against projects, this very small projects, it's very small campaigns, even it's for a very small valley, for example, is very important for us, but we never should lose the view to the whole. And this is what the ecology movement tries to do, to connect activists, groups in North Kurdistan, and support them in their struggles, but also to spread the discussions among themselves and to discuss alternatives, how to change society in an ecological way, how we can develop ecological thinking and ecological acting. This means a lot of educational work. We do it for us, we do it in cooperation with other movements, small NGOs, parties, or the neighborhood councils. We tried to connect with themselves, because we don't want to only share our knowledge, we want to take knowledge from them. So with the economy movement, we have intensive exchange with the women movement, very important. We have the exchange with the health, the education movement. We don't say the ecological groups, we say the ecological groups should not struggle for themselves alone. The connection must be there and part of a bigger democracy struggle. But whatever we have done is always limited by repression. Until 2050, the opportunities were bigger. Nevertheless, today the comrades in North Kurdistan, they continue to work. We are planning new cooperatives, academy, but it goes step by step. And other movements, they have their projects. They are not so much known maybe in the public so much because of the repression. Anyway, so at that point I come to Rojava. I think I spoke 10 minutes or a little more, I'm not sure. Anyway, So in Rojava, we had the liberation in 2012, and just 1 year later, in 2013, the first cooperatives have been set up by the people, the activists, the revolutionaries in Rojava. I mean, the revolution in Rojava follows also democratic confederalism and democratic autonomy. And in the very early stage, the movements there set up a number of cooperatives. In 2014, I could visit some of them. And already just 1 year later, there were a lot of big discussions where it should go. I mean, at that point, there were few dozen cooperatives, and they were a niche in the economy. And not even, they didn't cover even 1% of the economy. But the aim was to first to have cooperatives, to look how they work in Rojava, and because at that point most of them had the theory, and they looked to other practices, but to implement it in your country is always a different issue, and the challenges are always a bit or more different. Anyway, so there were a lot of discussions always going on around the cooperatives. One thing was that the cooperatives, they had a, let's say, direction which was not accepted by all, and everybody had some other emphases in how they work. So a big discussion started on, let's say, on the principles of cooperatives in Rojava. It started until the end of 2016. A statute has been prepared, and this said, okay, if economic structure wants to describe itself as a cooperative, then the following points must be fulfilled. One is that the two genders, if it's a mixed one, must be presented. In generally, of course, that women must be part of it at a minimum level, at least 1/3 or 40%. And then the second one, the production must be ecological as possible. Another one is that all cooperative members should be part of the cooperatives. So everybody who's a member has to contribute at a different level. Another point is cooperatives should not lead other people work for them, like with a salary. The work must be done by the people, and the cooperatives are part of the economy movement. Let's say the cooperative movement, and the cooperative movement is part of the economy movement in Rojava. And there are other principles and discussions in Rojava. The big goal is to develop them let's say, maybe 10, 15, or 20 years, that 50% of the economy is covered by the cooperatives. This is what said. It's very general. 2017, when I could visit Rojava again, the number of cooperatives grew, and this economy, the movement of cooperatives, just has been set up on district level, on canton level, on Rojava level, and it was a time where it grew very fast. And yes, and different kind of cooperatives existed at that point. I guess end of 2017, there were almost 200 cooperatives, and they covered, it's difficult to say, at least few percent of the economy. And the first conference of cooperatives has been done end of 2017. But then such conferences were both participation they didn't continue in that way. They found more ways on canton level. However, end of 2017, beginning of 2018, there was a discussion to say, that some of the cooperatives, they don't work. They have been founded, but they are not successful in the way of really producing something, or let's say how it works internally in a democratic way. So 40, 50 cooperatives have been, let's say, more or less shut down. So we see today the number is a bit higher. I don't know exactly, but something like 200 or more. Many of the cooperatives, they have been founded, are agricultural cooperatives. They have been founded on agricultural land, which belonged or has been operated directly by the Syrian state, which is 5% of the whole agricultural land in Rojava. In Rojava, not all of North and East Syria. And this was a lot of land, and it's a lot of land. And the economy movement said, okay, if people come together from communes, we can give the land to people to form a cooperative. So people have been supported that they form cooperatives. Let's see, depending on what they done, 5, 10, 20 people came together and started to produce. And this is important. The movement, economic movement, could have established much more cooperatives, but they don't, let's say, force indirectly people to form cooperatives. They say it must be totally voluntarily, and there must be big discussion why a cooperative and how it works, because the aim is to overcome the capitalist mentality, which has been spread also by the Syrian state, also to Kurdish people. A person can support the Kurdish free movement, but in terms of economy, it is affected by the capitalist modernity. Actually, we all are affected. So the mentality change is a big discussion there. And yes, and it's always a way of, let's say, practice, then stop, think about it, and go a step further. This is the way they go forward in Rojava. And we have now several, few dozen cooperatives which have been established by people's own initiative. The economic movement didn't go to people and said, made this or so. And now we have several dozen at least initiatives in the cities or at the land where people come together and start to produce together. They see that cooperatives are a way where they can, let's say, work, but also to find themselves in the work, and then also which is beneficial for the society. Private companies beneficial for itself and very limited to the society usually. We have also in Rojava a lot of, I would say, private companies, but most are small and they don't dominate like in a normal capitalist economy. We have public companies, many, and there's a discussion to transform public companies in cooperatives, but this is another big issue. You have public company where you have workers, they work for salary, and transform them is also another big challenge. I think globally it's a big challenge. And the activists there, they were discussing this issue a lot. Another point I would like to emphasize, and I think I have 20 minutes, is that among the cooperatives, the women cooperatives are the most successful. The cooperatives which had to have been shut down or stopped to work, they were usually mixed ones. But the women cooperatives, they are quite successful. This can be explained by itself with a female character of the revolution, and we look to the former living conditions of the people in Rojava and northeast Syria, and with the gender question as well. Yes, I guess this is from my side for this point, and then we can continue the discussion. Thank you. Gelexpas.
Gelexpas, Ercan, thanks. This was enlightening. Now I will be giving the floor to Ana and Marcelo, who will be talking on the topic organizational solidarity in practice in Latin America. So the Latin American experience, actually, basically, focusing particularly on Bolivia and Argentina. So Ana Inés Heras is an Argentinian national researcher at National Research Council and a professor at the University of San Martin in Buenos Aires in Argentina. She also coordinates the Institute for Social Inclusion and Human Development, and she's responsible for the learning and learning in and of self-governance or self-rule, I don't know, autogestion. She's currently a member of the board at the Community Economies Institute International. She has published in Spanish and in English, and her main topics of study and activism are autogestion, so self-rule, workers' cooperativism, and grassroots organizing. Welcome, Ana. And Marcelo Vieta is an associate professor in the program in adult education and community development, and the director of the Center for Learning, Social Economy Work, both at Ontario Institute for Studies in Education of the University of Toronto. Marcelo is the author of Workers' Self-Management in Argentina, contesting neoliberalism by occupying companies, creating cooperatives, and recuperating autogestion. Marcelo is currently leading 2 major research projects in Canada, and he's an active member or board member of a number of formations or organizations such as among others, International Network of Workers' Economy or the Canadian Association for Studies in Cooperation. Marcelo's research and teach focuses on the sociology of the work, the social and solidarity economy, and the new cooperativism. Regionally, he's focusing on Latin America, Canada, and Italy. And as I said, I will be repeating once again, they will be presenting together on organizational solidarity in practice in Latin America, building cooperatives and coalitions of resistance and creativity in Bolivia and Argentina. I think you will be sharing your screen for presenting, right? Yes. All right, cool. Then floor is yours, Ana and Marcelo. Please go ahead.
Gracias.
Thank you so much. Gracias. I will share screen.
Okay. So I think I will start by saying that I had been a worker in a cooperative for many years prior to getting into academia, which is something that I think it's interesting in light of the ideas that Ercan brought for us to think about, which means how do we learn in practice and conceptualize what we do, and how is it that in practicing these big words of autogestión or solidarity are built day to day. And Marcelo also has a very rich experience from that angle, meaning that because of his background and because of his work, he's also been involved in very many cooperative-like or social solidarity-like groups and movements. And in that way, I think we are both first and foremost activists. I'm sorry, but I have a neighbor who's building something. And I think you saw me sending WhatsApp to the neighbor asking him not to do this, but anyhow, I hope you can hear me. Marcelo, can you go to the next slide? What we'll be, we will be sharing with you some ideas regarding solidarity in practice, and we are going to focus on during the first part, I will talk about the concept of organization, solidarity, and coalition. And I will do that by bringing also some historical perspectives within our region, even though Marcelo will be focusing more on the cases of Bolivia and Argentina that we will bring to share with you. So Marcelo, if you can go to the next one, that would be great. So here is to show you that Marcelo and I have been working together, and these are some of our shared publications. And the one that we will be speaking from today is one that has come out this year in the journal Organization. We tried to focus on publishing both in Spanish and English, which is an issue that I would like to discuss later in the question and answer part of this session, meaning that language is a very important piece to any movement, as I am very aware that you all know. And sometimes the fact that we have taken for granted that English is our common language brings some issues of not so comfortable feelings amongst several peoples in the Americas, or at least in what we call America Latina. However, we also know that if and when we publish in English, we may be able to reach out to peoples whose first language or may not be English, but who can read in English and then exchange. So that's an issue that I think, in light of the topic of today, which is decolonizing our minds and decolonizing our practices, it would be good to address later on. So Marcelo, can you go to next slide? I said prior to starting that we will be talking through the concepts of organization, solidarity, and difference. And in this piece, what we addressed when we started thinking about organization is that usually, or for many social theorists, organization is conceived of as an entity, as a something. However, what we have been seeing both in our own practices and our own research practice is that any so-called organization is actually a network of relationships and or a network of groups, meaning that even though you may name one organization, I will name one, for example, in Argentina, Unión Solidaria de Trabajadores, which is a large cooperative close to Buenos Aires city, 77 cooperative workers together. This is a recovered factory in Argentina. That is an entity, an organization. However, in working with them a long time, we've been working with them for 10 years now, we have found that the so-called organization is a long interspersed network of relationships across groups and organizations, which means that they are building in practice solidarity in difference, which also means that these kinds of organizations go through several different debates, tensions, and sometimes even, I would use the word in English, fights within and across organizations. And I'm aware of what I'm saying, meaning that sometimes you may think, how come we're talking about solidarity and we're talking about debate and fights or tensions? And this is exactly what we want to focus on, meaning that, as Ercan was saying, we need, I think he used the term mentality change. And that means that we need to continue, reflect, and practice ways of debating without getting to the point that the organizations are broken, or if they are, that we keep in mind that that learning experience that continually goes on is regenerated in different sets of relationships. So that's another maybe provocative issue that I would like to discuss later if we could and can. So if we go to the next slide, I will walk you through, next one, por favor. La siguiente, gracias. Some historical facts. Our region has been colonized forever and keeps on being colonized. So we can talk about several times and spaces of colonizing and colonization. Starting with, of course, Europe getting into our territories in the 15th century and so on, but also what we call sometimes neo-colonization, that is the intervention, continual intervention of the US and US in conjunction with other nations into other countries. So what you're seeing on the screen are two maps, one from a long time ago, another one more recent, that shows you how this process keeps on going. But next, Marcelo, so that means that to every process of domination, there's always a process of resistance, as Michel Foucault would say. And so what we are trying to highlight with these other two maps is that there are continual processes of taking up decision-making by peoples themselves. So these maps have been constructed by militants and activists in our region, highlighting that even though these processes of neo-colonizations happen all the time, there's also processes of regaining, reclaiming, and fighting against, which is, I think, similar to the experiences that Ercan was speaking about. In our case, this means also coalitions and solidarity across nations and across ethnic.
Seranseri netawyan, seranseri komen etnik eftиш bektehat. Olive dere dve slaytede ez dukhwazim bala xabedim ser ve yekeko klive hereme çendin zaman tem bekaranîn. Herçend zamanên kolonyal hene jî ku ew zamanên rewayên huquqî û qanûnî ne, ango İspanî, Portugîzî û İngilîzî hene, li tevî wan jî dîrokeke gelek dewlemend a ziman û çandên din hene ku ew jî dîrokeke
in the colonial language. The first term that you see on this slide is Aylin Kausai, which may translate roughly to buen vivir, or life in harmony. And I was reflecting while I was here Ercan speak about the terms nature and human beings, so on and so forth. Many of these groups do not differentiate across nature/humans and have a rich language and a rich conceptualization in their own native language that expresses differently these relationships. So I'd be also curious to know that if in any of the regions that people are here today with us, if in any of those regions similar things happen, and whether or not they have whether or not there's a dominant perspective in a colonial language that sometimes imposes itself over what the traditions of the peoples may be. So if we can go to the next slide, I will point out three authors that I'm choosing to highlight now. Marcelo, I think you have to double click to have them be on the screen. Gracias. Aimé Césaire, Franz Fanon, and Silvia Rivera Cusicanqui. I've chosen these three, but of course there's many other people that we could have put up on the screen. I'm pointing these people out just because the three of them coincide on the issue that they have been activists and put their lives and are putting their lives through to fight for the right to self-name yourself and to, as Ercan was saying, to be an autonomous organization or people. They have also highlighted the fact that language is also a tool of resistance and fight. And the way we speak, the way we create terms, the capacity to invent ways of talking is also taking up the struggle. And I'm sure you're very aware of this. And again, it would be nice to hear the examples come through. Silvia Rivera Cusicanqui is an author from Bolivia. I'm not sure whether you can see the cover of her book here. She's also worked on the importance of not only oral traditions, but also images, meaning the arts of people, and photography as a way to recover practices from long time ago that are still present in our times. So I think that in summarizing the points I wanted to make in this part of our presentation, there's one issue was the issue about what counts as an organization and whether or not we think of an organization as an entity and as a network of groups and practices that come together, and that in doing that, they need to find a way to work together in solidarity and in difference. That was one of the main points. The other main point is that we are traversed by colonial and neo-colonial practices all over our region, and that are still present, and yet practices of resistance against those practices are in place and are really shaping up every day. And the third point is that language is a tool, and we maybe can focus on that as we keep on talking. So le paso la palabra a Marcelo. Gracias.
Okay, gracias, Ana. Thank you. And I'm going to now talk about two illustrative case studies. I want to underscore that they're not representative of the organizational solidarity and practice and indifference that we've noticed in Abya or what is so-called Latin America, but they're illustrative of the types of organization that are happening bottom up across the region because of and against the neoliberal, neo-colonial project. So the first project is the campesino indígena movements that we see in Bolivia, coalescing traditional practices of indigenous groups, the Aymara and Quechua in particular, with urban neighborhood experiences in order to self-organize sociopolitical spaces. So the Bolivian example for us is about self-organizing social and political spaces, drawing on traditional experiences, but also creating new syncretic, so to speak, experiences from traditional indigenous experiences, working class experiences, and contemporary resistances and projects against and because of and beyond the neoliberal project. So the particular case that we took up using the work of Cusicanqui, Civechi, and Aguilar were the neighborhood projects and councils in El Alto, which is a suburb. It's a fairly new city of several 100,000 that's next to La Paz in Bolivia. What happened is because of the neoliberal project of extractivism that the Bolivian state was involved in, many indigenous people were displaced from their traditional lands. And what they did was they were internal migrants. They met in collectively from different parts, the Llanos and the Andean regions in El Alto, which is this new, kind of relatively new urban conglomeration. What they did was they merged traditional practices of the Ayllu, for example. These are pre-Incan Andean practices of co-organizing labor, work, and production, inter and intra-familially within communities. So they merged these traditional millennia-old experiences with working class experiences. Many of these groups were miners or agricultural workers, campesinos. So there are a multiplicity of identities too. They're indigenous, they're mestizo, but they're also working class, right? So they merged this in El Alto and brought these practices of the Ayllu and other forms of organizing to reinvent the neighborhood and co-organize the neighborhood, despite and beyond the Bolivian state. So what's happened is El Alto has become a parallel state in essence. Neighborhood councils are in control of the local economy. And there are hundreds of them. They started from a few dozen in the 80s when these first waves of migrations occurred, to now about several hundred of these neighborhood councils that collectively self-manage both politically and economically their neighborhoods and trade between neighborhoods. And they're run by councils of women and men, and youth are also involved in the decision making. There's a tax system that they have that's a local tax system. So this is almost like a parallel state, a counter to the neoliberal Bolivian state, but also working within it, right? So it's full of contradictions, but it's also full of promise and prefiguration. What Kusikanki says is that these experiences bring short and long-term collective memory. And then when a term, and she takes up this term from the Aymara word shichi. And then the shichi, sorry, it's a Quechua word, the shichi is the motley. So it's not a pure anything. It's a bringing together a past, present, and current experiences and potentially future experiences into a collective reimagining of the sociopolitical and socioeconomic reality. Raul Zebechi talks about bringing in indigenous practices of resistance. So for example, the flee strategy. So the flee strategy is when the state has to be resisted, then informal, collective, and ad hoc groups will form to take the streets and to seize the streets, to sting like a flea and then disperse. So this is part of the collective, these tactics and strategies Zebechi calls dispersed power or dispersing power. It's a form of power that's dispersed, that's neighborhood-based, that brings in these collective and short-term memories, those long and short-term memories as well. And then Aguilar talks about Pachacuti, which is the Pachacuti is seizing, is creating the new out of all these experiences as well. So that's the experience of Bolivia and the organizational solidarity and practices that we talk about in this piece that some of you, I think, have read. The other experience is from a working class experience. Again, responding to the neoliberal neocolonial project, but in a different conjuncture. At the same time, roughly, these movements have happened over the past 20 or 30 years. This is Argentina's worker-led Empresas Recuperadas por sus Trabajadores. These are workers that have seized their workplaces and that have been drawing on working class self-activity to convert companies to cooperatives and self-managed spaces of production. So these are conversions of private firms to cooperatives by workers themselves because of and despite crisis as they neoliberal crisis as they radiated onto shop floors. Interestingly, that these are conversions of socioeconomic spaces that could be perhaps, that there could be some transnational learning that can be done between as you said, Ercan, the desire to convert more and more public sector organizations to cooperatives in Rojava. I think there could be some dialogue between the experiences of Argentina and these empresas recuperadas and how they've done it, how these workers have done it bottom up, and what could be possibly done, again, in different conjuncture and different situation, but in Rojava as well. So we hope these examples stimulate further thinking around this transnationally. These workers are recuperating workplaces and the working class notion of autogestión. Autogestión is much more than the English, not adequate, I think, English translation, self-management. It's more embodied, it's more of this coalition building, it's more bottom-up politically driven. This is the word that the workers of the empresas recuperadas themselves use. The work that we did for this case study is drawn to a large extent from my book, Worker Self-Management in Argentina, which came out a couple of years ago, and from the work that, and I've been working with the empresas recuperadas workers for the past 15, 17 years, and Ana Inés and her associates have also been working extensively with them. As she mentioned, Unión Solidaria de Trabajadores was one of the cases that I also covered in my book. In Argentina, they also seize on collective memories of past working class resistance and organizing within and beyond the workplace. Now, taking over workplaces doesn't just happen out of nowhere. This isn't just invented out of nowhere, but it's connected to past struggles and past experiences. So Argentina has a rich tradition of labor activism and activist unionism on shop floors, shop stewards, councils, workers' councils, inter-factory solidarity networks in moments of past crises in the late 1960s, for example, that transformed neighborhoods. And the experiences of the 60s resonated into the crises days of 2001, where the neoliberal system collapsed in Argentina and neighborhood assemblies were formed, factories were seized, highways and roads were taken over by piqueteros, or formerly unemployed state workers. And this moment of extreme learning and extreme possibility for another post-capitalist society emerged, where there was truly self-organized bottom-up. And those resonances are still there in Argentina, and you see them in the almost daily street protests that happen for various reasons. And the current role and resonance and voice that social movement people have with the state as well. So both demanding of the state and also creating their own spaces. So of socioeconomic possibility. So we see this in Argentina's empresas recuperadas, and they transform ultimately work organizations, communities, and subjectivities. The most promising situation of organizational solidarity and practice and difference that emerges from the empresas recuperadas is that many of them become community centers. So they not only become worker cooperatives that create whatever they do 9 to 5, whatever they produce, but they also become they also become cooperative K-12 equivalency schools, for example, in a movement that emerged out of the ERT movement, which is the Bachilleratos Populares. There's a popular high schools. So they're also cooperatives that teachers from the public sector come and volunteer at these spaces. They become recreation centers. Many of them become spaces for the community to come together, and they offer free health, for example. UST, University of Trabajadores, that Anna mentioned, is one of these promising spaces that's both opened up the shop to the community, but then redirected revenues to the community for local community development. And this is in a situation that we find throughout Latin America, where the state in Latin America, in most Latin American countries, despite the history of dictatorships, is actually a weak state. So they're strong politically and as far as getting into power, but most Latin American states have a hard time of applying laws and applying policies. And so this opens up the space to either criminality or, fringe movements that aren't necessarily about the well-being of all, as we find in, for example, the drug cartels of Colombia and other experiments like that, but also And obviously most promising are experiments in bottom-up socioeconomic possibilities and bottom-up democracy, as we find in Bolivia, as we also find in Colombia. So it's not just about that, and as we find in Argentina. So what these spaces do is recreate the territory, and they actually fill in the gaps where the state can't, won't go, or isn't able to go. And in the process, they're recreating and redefining what it means to be, to organize politically, collectively, and economically as well. So how do we come to these conclusions and these threads? Again, I want to underscore that these were not representative of what's happening in Latin America, but illustrative of the many other cases that we could have drawn from. The Movimiento Sem Terras in Brazil, the Mapuche movements, and other myriad indigenous movements from Chile and Bolivia and Ecuador and other parts, and Peru and other parts of Latin America, the Zapatistas, etc. Drawing from and using a diverse economies approach that this piece that we are presenting on draws from. We drew on the strategy of an inventory of experiences. You make an inventory, you make visible these experiences to create what J.K. Gibson Graham have called, drawing on the work of others, weak theory. That is a theory that doesn't universalize and impose from bottom down or top down, but actually is open and emergent and generative. So a better word perhaps is a generative theory. So using, deploying and learning from these experiences to then create and generate a new theory that's both connected historically from the voices of the territories, and also that decenters universalizing Eurocentric theories as well. I want to also say that we talk about, and implicit in our piece and in our work, is prefiguration, but rather than to prefigure the future, we draw on the notion of Shichi and the work of Kasikanki to say that an indigenous prefiguration, an indigenous way of looking and caring for the non-human and the social, is to consider the past, the present, and the future at once. So it's a prefiguration that it kind of unpacks time, this kind of Eurocentric linear progression of time, the sense of linear progression of time, to past, present, and future seized at the same time. And this is this collective memory that's recuperated that I was talking about. So organizational solidarity in practice is a concept. Again, the open generative concept that we've used and that we've learned from these experiences, and interesting tensions that have remained is how do you talk about organizing and organization, a Eurocentric term that's used in management studies, for example, to talk about how indigenous groups and other groups with millennia of experience and ancestral traditions. Is that about organizing? What kind of, we use the concept of organizing? How do we speak about coming together collectively for the good of, for the common good? And so this is one of the issues that remains in tension from our piece. And then conceptualizing solidarity as well. The solidarity is another Eurocentric word. But we've tried to, in the spirit of Latin American social movements, to reclaim it. And as J.K. Gibson Graham say, queer the term, right? So to seize it and turn it on its head and make it something else besides the social, the social political sense of solidarity that we draw on from the European tradition, and into something that's political, a solidarity that's emergent but not fixed, right? It's not fixed in time, and it disperses and sometimes comes together like the fleece strategy. So the emergent themes that we concluded with, that we see in these illustrative cases, are that the solidarity and difference, organizational solidarity and difference in Latin America, we propose, or we see these, that they arise within a neoliberal context. This is the new colonialism in Latin America, very much so. The neo-colonial experiment of the neoliberal context, it's a resistance against, but it's also creative creation of something new despite. So this, Anna mentioned this resistance and creativity, drawing from collective memory of past experiences, short and long-term memory, but also of the possibilities of the future and what's happening in the present as well. And enabling autogestión, self-management, both at the level of the company or of the productive unit, but the neighborhood and the broader society, and horizontalización, or horizontalization of spaces of production and knowledge creation. And then ultimately coalitional possibilities we're left with. That these are modes and methods of creating coalitions that are that can seize on a particular situation, act collectively, but also disperse as needed. So I'm going to pass it on to an organizational solidarity practice and difference. We define it here. I'm going to pass it on to Anna for the questions that we have for you today.
Gracias, Marcelo. So in taking a methodological angle and say, if you were to look at these issues wherever you're at, we think that these questions are good starters. What does organizational solidarity in practice look like where you're at? What is it in dispute? What is it that people are disputing or resistant against? Who is coalescing with whom, for what, when, where, and whether there are coalitions that are sometimes formed and then dispersed and then recreated again over time and over spaces, which is the case here in America Latina. What are the processes of subjectivation that seem to arise? I think this is similar to what Ercan mentioned before as mentality change. We're calling it the processes of creating different subjectivities that are in place because they are transforming and transformative at the same time. And what contradictions emerge and are put to work? What is it that takes place within the contradictions? Before in the talk Ercan shared with us, he was speaking, for example, about women and men. And I was reflecting on the fact that at least in Argentina, there's also the case of the struggle of lesbian, gay, transgender, and bisexual queer people who are also disputing the notion of male-female per se, and they are a big part, again, at least in Argentina and mostly in some of the big cities in Argentina, of coalescing in solidarity for self-decision and self-government. So that's a question that came to my mind while I was thinking through these issues today. And finally, in the last slide, Marcelo, if we want to show it, we leave you with whether you have seen these issues in your practices and in your spaces, and you have conceptualized these in different ways. And what are those, if you want to share those with us? What are the possibilities and changes and challenges when you start with this framework that we started today, looking through language, looking how people speak about their own practices, and use language as a resource in struggle as well? The other question is, how do we speak with rather than for others, which is something that relates to Ercan's thought about domination within these kinds of experiences. Sometimes people who emerge from these experiences, some people, some key people may take up a role that would speak for their own people, and that's a tension across direct democracy and representation that I think it's interesting to face and to ask ourselves about. And how do we engage in research and with research in a disposition of what we call in Spanish acompañamiento, which in the work we do here in Argentina, we call collaborative research of collective property, propiedad colectiva. And we have ways of sharing this kind of work. But I'll leave you there because I think we're over our time. And gracias.
Gracias.
Galexpas, thank you very much, Anna and Marcelo. This was, I mean, reminding me many things, many discussions from the history of Kurdistan. But one thing that I wanted to particularly mention actually is the question of autogestion, how to translate this. This has been a question for Kurds as well, because we have this term khweseri, which basically means being oneself, but it is more than that. And we were trying to in the early days of Rojava Revolution in 2012, we were trying to translate what, like right now it's rather established self-rule or self-governance, but in early days we were trying to translate this to English, how we were going to call this. And you reminded me all these beautiful memories just in the 10th year of Rojava Revolution, actually. So that's why I want to thank you, particularly for this as well. Well,
can you spell the word in the chat for me? Shweseri, yes. Someone else did. Gracias.
Okay, cool. Yes, thanks, Sardar. So yes, and now we will be receiving questions and trying to have answers to those questions. We already started to receive questions. We have so far, okay, we have one question, and I'm sure there will be more, and I also have questions. Just to let you know that you can speak your question, so you can unmute, we can unmute you and you can ask your question directly, or you can simply write your question into the chat box or Q&A box. And once again, just to remind, there's Kurdish translation. Our dear friend Celil Kaya is translating for us. Thanks again, Celil.
Yeah, thank you.
So in case you want to hear in Kurdish, voila, here's the translation. Well, I will ask my question first, if you don't mind, and abusing my role, of course, as usual. And then I will ask a question. And meanwhile, dear participants, meanwhile, you can raise your hand, or you can simply type your questions in the Q&A box. And my question is basically about the ways we organize, because this has always been I mean, especially since the collapse of Soviet Union, this was a deep question. How should we organize? Because it was a huge blow up on the global resistance, if I may say so, and how to organize actually. There's always this contradiction or confrontation, if you like, between the term organization and horizontalization. I mean, have to come together on the one hand, and try to keep your autonomy on the other hand. So in Rojava, people, the revolutionaries and the people of Rojava developed some answers to these questions, and also in other parts of the world. But I would love to hear a little bit more on this aspect, because there are related questions that relates to internationalism, which is something that I will be asking after your answers. But there are many things that are coming out of this question. So this confrontation between organizing and horizontal autonomy, if you like. And both, I mean, whomever wants to provide an answer, please go ahead.
Can I just start with the autogestion, which Anna and I have spent a lot of time thinking about. In fact, it's a good portion of my book. And I try to, of the worker self-management in Argentina, I try to draw on what I learned from the workers themselves before, hold back on theorizing, and then kind of addressing what it means based on what I learned from the actual workers and how they use it. The word self-management is not adequate in English. And English, for example, English. So English, I'll just take English. English is full of foreign words. So part of my, part of the things that I'm trying to do in my academic work, but also in my more popular writing, is to try to bring this word, autogestión. Maybe the word is, maybe it's coeseri, but another word that seizes, that talks more about the completeness, the fullness of what it means to co-direct, co-create one's life. So and by life, I mean social life and our relationship to non-human life as well, and the non-human world. So autogestión is from the Greek autos, self, and from the Latin gerere. Gerere is interesting. It's to manage, but it's also to gestate. To gestate. Gestation is self-creation. We self-produce. It's an self-production. Gestation, right? Gestation, pregnancy. It's related to life, birth, newness, but also embodied possibility, creation, creativity. So this all, for me, is what is such rich language. So it's so much more richer and politically charged, and full of possibility and prefiguration than self-management, which, you can, it's anyway. So, and this is what we mean by kind of playing with language. And then I started working with Anna, and now, but it's not only autogestión, and we've been talking about and working through other ways that we can collectively come together and organize productively. I don't know, maybe Anna, you want to talk briefly about that.
Maybe Ercan wants to go first.
Okay.
Would like to chime in.
I just want to say before that this relates to your question of horizontalization.
I have lots to say. It's not
sorry.
about me not having anything to say. It's just maybe Ercan wants to.
Okay.
Yes, Ercan, please go ahead.
Okay. So the horizontalization is something we promote and we develop, and this is possible to a big extent, but and in a commune or in a very settlement, in a very limited space, you can develop it very much, and this is the basis of the, let's say, self-governing way we aim to. But at a certain point, you must connect these autonomous structures, even the small ones. In Kurdistan, we call them communes, or in Kurdish commune, and you must connect them. And our world is, let's say, it's not small, and there are many people, much more than in the history. And the big question is how you connect these communes, or these smallest entities, groups at the local level, which are, let's say, democratic, horizontal, organized. And the history, there are ways, council democracy, and so on. But what we have, let's say, in this, in the last 200 years of practice, it's a bit limited, but it's developing. But the big question is how to connect them, and connecting them on different levels brings more, let's say, it's more new structures up, kind of, let's say, a more complicated way to act with each others, and it needs rules, a kind of rules, a way of rules. It makes the situation more complicated. And what I have learned from our movement is that at least the way we do it the more democratic you are, more participative you are, the more complicated, not complicated, complex it is. It is understandable, but it's difficult. It's not easy to get into and to understand it and to give a sense for it. It's quite complicated, yes, and difficult, let's say difficult and challenging you. And at least we have no other ways to develop it. I mean, we need to, let's take, for example, Rojava. It's a territory, not a small territory, and you, in the ideal situation, you have no enemies around you, and you have other communes and other regions around you. Then it's much more uncomplicated, and then you have the space and time to develop it. And here you have to, because wherever you are, there's a capitalist state, there's reactionary forces, groups, parties which are want to attack you directly, indirectly, with different means. And so you are also forced to come together and then to reply to them. Nevertheless, but one thing is what we say is, despite all aggression from states or reactionary forces, wherever we are, even in refugee camps, we must organize as the more democratic as possible. And this is the case in Rojava, for example, or in Mahmur in South Kurdistan, or wherever else where people live together. They say the more democratic, decentralized, autonomous, the more it is better. And we are in a process. This is what I say. And Rojava is interesting, and it experienced different levels of self-organizing. There's always a continuous change. It's small, small, small, but if you look over the last 10 years, there's a very interesting process. For me.
Thank you, Ercan. Anna, let me read one question, because it directly relates to this.
I have a couple of things to say though, but I'll listen to that and I'll integrate.
I'm sure you will be integrating, and you will be happy to having heard this question actually. So an anonymous attendee asks, thank you so much for the seminar. It has been incredible. Would you like to? I would like to hear from the panelists how they think we can relate those experiences in a way to part from local and or autonomous experiences to an internationalist proposal for a counter-hegemonic economy / society / way of life. So this is directly relating to what I asked actually. And if Ercan, if you want to tackle later on this question, you can go ahead. But first, let's hear what Anna has to say.
Okay. Yeah, I'll integrate as I speak. First thing I would like to say is SPAS. Is that correct? Gracias. How do you pronounce that?
SPAS.
SPAS only.
Yes.
Okay. SPAS.
Only, yes.
Okay.
SPAS, you're welcome, rather. Yeah.
Okay. SPAS. So I would like to speak about these issues, taking an example from my practice at the university. When I teach at the university, I teach both undergraduate and graduate courses. I use a perspective that is informed by autogestión, chueserí. We call it, maybe mixing up languages, pedagogic huecherí. I'm creating something new here. Okay, autogestión pedagógica en castellano. And what happens when we start our courses the first day is usually that people feel very tense, even though they enroll in the course and they know this perspective is going to happen. They are afraid of what may happen within this context of making sure that your voice, if you're a student, is being heard, that you will have the power of making decisions with the people who are teaching the course, so on and so forth. So what we do is we do what we call asambleas pedagógicas, pedagogical assemblies. Every class, I teach classes that are 4 hours long, so I'm happy with that format because that allows me to work with this methodology. But what I bring to your attention with this example is that on the one hand, as Ercan was saying, when people multiply who are taking decision, it becomes more complex, and it becomes even more complex in a place like the university, which is a hierarchical space by definition. And so making sure that we can work with the students at the same time on the content of the class we teach and on the methodology that this perspective is bringing forward is a challenge. However, in doing that over time, over the weeks that the course takes place, these questions about horizontality and organization come to the center, to the focus, which is we need to find ways of organizing, and we need to find ways to make sure that direct and horizontal democracy is at place. And so we create ways. What I'm trying to say here is that with each group that I teach every year is different. No group has used the same tools over time. Even though I invite students from other cohorts to share with the new cohort whatever they want in the assemblies. It's open. And so information is cross-pollinized, I would say. It's pollinated, it's generated, but it's not taking up just like it was or it is, it's created. So that's an interesting point that I think we can work through in thinking about this direct democracy and organization, twisting a bit the sense of organizing in a hierarchical way to make it become more a creative day-to-day solution to what happens. Yet I'm very aware of the fact that when you are in war or your life is at risk, you need to make sure that there's something in place that we may call organization that protects you from being killed. I've had that experience myself because I'm from the generation, I started middle school with the dictatorship, and I was already a militant at 12 years old. And so I was a militant, I mean, in a political party at that point. I'm no longer a member of a political party, but at that time I was, and I had been at that point for 13 years. So that means that I know what it means that you need something in place that protects you from, in this case, being killed or being kidnapped. So that tension that we are highlighting now, I think has to be rethought in every single context. In other words, I don't think there's an overall answer. Yet what I conclude from at least the example I'm giving out of the teaching experience is that there are some key concepts that do work for making sure that we have something in place that protects us all, and something in place that allows us all to be a part of what we're doing. And that I have been calling poder en madre, which in English maybe doesn't make sense, but it's something like enmothering power. And here I'm talking about the fact that this kind of power is a power where the first premise is that we all care for each other, even though you or you may not think or do what I think or do. And that is always very visible in, I'm continuing here with the example of the classes I teach, is very visible because students are very different, they do things differently, and they sometimes have a lot of tensions amongst each other. But the overall idea is that we create a safe space to be within. So with this very local, very tiny example that I'm giving, I want to address the other question of internationalization. international organizing. There's 2 or 3 ways I can think of. There's the forums that are taking place. There's the global tapestry of alternatives. If anyone is interested, I can post it on the chat when I finish talking now. There's the Community Economies Research Network also, of which Marcelo and I are a part. And these, these 3 experiencias internacionales have been for a long time and keep on connecting people over countries and geographies. There's also the Congreso de las Economías de los Trabajadores. As a matter of fact, I did meet people from Rojava in those congresos. And so that's another way to connect. And I think what is important to keep in mind is that we need to find ways to have time to talk and converse, which is sometimes difficult to find, but I think that's important. Let's keep on talking, in other words. Paso palabra, I could talk forever. As you can notice, I am a talker by nature, but I pass the word. Gracias.
Sorry. Yeah, thank you, Anna. This is great. I would like to read a couple of questions. I will first read 2 questions that are directed to Anna and Marcelo. And then I will read a question directed to Ercan so that you have time to think a little bit. And then when you answer, Ercan will have time to think of his answer. So the question for Anna and Marcelo from Rana Shukara, sorry for my mispronunciation from the very beginning. So the question is, hello, thank you for the brilliant presentation. I have a couple of questions. Do you face legal barriers, or have you faced legal barriers, and how did you overcome them? In the Argentinian and Bolivian case, who offers the land for agriculture co-ops? Was the solidarity economy more prominent during times of crisis? Example, 2001 Argentina crisis or 2008 global crisis? Or is it, between brackets, hopefully, ongoing ways of living and producing? And there's another question for you, Anna and Marcelo. Can you elaborate on the notion of Chikhi, sorry for mispronunciation. How can we replace the Eurocentric notion of the linear time within with it? There's a question directed to Ercan from Thabo Hundgeburt. Ercan, thank you so much. My question concerns the ecological cooperations as basis for a social economy and development. More specifically, can cooperatives produce some kind of surplus that can be reinvested in order to raise the living standards of the people? Though I understand that extractive and exploitative profit making for investment in capital for growth is as such not desirable. It seems certainly desirable to grow in a way to reduce unpleasant manual work and increase the quality of life, especially in environments where people are struggling to make ends meet. In fact, also and this is for Anna and Marcelo. In fact, also the perspectives of Anna and Marcelo on cooperatives, economy and living standards would be very interesting to me. Thank you. So let's first go for hear Anna and Marcelo, and then we will be hearing Ercan.
Okay, maybe Anna can start. Okay, let me start with the Shichi, and I did. It's Aymara. I said it was Quechua, I think, in my part of the presentation. But this is interesting. I'll start with this because it wraps up neatly, not neatly, but what the promising takeaways are for other movements and how we can think about recreating our worlds from our place. And I'm just going to read really brief this brief from our piece, because I'm going to use the words of Rivera Cusicanqui herself. So we write here that these have converged ancestral traditions with modernity, these experiments that we talked about in Bolivia, for example, into what rather provocatively Rivera Cusicanqui terms indigenous modernity. See, and this is interesting because it's not a throwing out everything we've acquired from the Enlightenment and modernity, but synchronizing it with indigeneity and indigenous ways of doing. So this is, she draws then from this concept of the Shichi, which is the Aymara, from the Aymara, the notion of the motley, or, the not pure. So think about a dog that's not a purebred. It's a motley, it's come from different places, and it ends up looking the same. If you interbreed dogs enough, they all look the same, right? But they're all a motley. They come from different places and different experiments. So then the Shichi is an indigenous notion of prefiguration, accounting for the past, present, and future interlaced in this project of indigenous modernity. And I'll just leave you with this. These are the words of Rivera Cusicanqui. It can emerge from the present in a spiral whose movement is a continuous feedback from the past to the future, a principle of hope or anticipatory consciousness that both discerns and realizes decolonization at the same time. So for her, it's a political project that's very much ingrained with decolonization, but it's not a throwing everything out. It's not a creating things from the new, but drawing on all these experiences of past, pre-colonial era, colonial era, modernity, indigeneity, and that. So we can create specific experiments and ways of organizing within our spaces that are contextualized, that are contextual, and learn from others, right? Like the organizing of co-ops in Rojava, for example, can also inform what's going on in Latin America and vice versa. And this is a form. This taps into internationalization too, right? But I won't go more into that because it's a matter of listening, and it all takes time. The problem with organizing, why the capitalist system automatically organizes horizontally is, yes, it's power. No, sorry, not horizontally, vertically, hierarchically. Why capitalism organizes hierarchically automatically is because it's fast, it's efficient, it creates surplus value the quickest. And this is not what we're talking about. Democratic decision-making, bottom-up, takes time. And so we have to reconceptualize the notion of what we mean by time, right? So I'm reminded of my friend Ruben Fernandez, who did work with the Mapuche communities in Chile, and he was doing research. He had 2 weeks with them. Well, he had to go through the whole tribal council, and it took months for them to be able to do interviews. So his academic Northern time did not meet the timelines of these indigenous communities. And this is very much, we have to reconceptualize the notion of time. And so in, sharing these experiments between the global South and the global North, Rojava and Latin America, and it takes time. And so I just want to leave you with that. And I don't know if you have the legal barriers. Anna's more.
Yeah, legal barriers are always there. In some of the experiences we've been working with, we form our group forms a part of a network where what is called here in Argentina social cooperatives are together. These social cooperatives are cooperatives whereby people who suffer from mental health issues and attend public health care will become a co-member of a cooperative with the professionals who work at that place. And they may create a working space whereby they produce something and they get some of their monies out of that cooperative work. So these are very special kinds of cooperatives. But I'm bringing this example because in the last 6 years that we have been participating with these cooperatives, there was a big challenge about the fact that Argentina had no special law or regulation rule, I should say, for these kinds of settings and spaces. And over time, our team helped document the specific ways in which these groups did things to propose changes in the normative that could account for what is real in everyday life. And it just happened a few months ago. So I'm like, yeah, but it took a lot of work. And again, this was one of the examples whereby people who were participating in the network were not seeing things alike at the beginning. There were a lot of debates and, like I said before, even fights at some points for what should be proposed and how and why. And I should say that the fact that this legal change was possible was also due to the fact that the national presidency changed here in Argentina in 2019. So this new administration was more prone to dialoguing with this kind of experiences that we had been documenting and working with. So I guess this is another example of coalescing and solidarity in diversity that we can speak about. I just want to give one more example about how to deal with difference within groups. And I'm just going to give 2 or 3 examples of groups that either I am a part of or I work with. For example, I had been a part of families in a public school. I sent my 2 youngest kids to a public school, and there's like what it's called in English PTA, Parent Teacher Association. But in this case in Argentina, it's an association of families, of the adults who are caring for the kids who go to those schools. And typically those associations are very hierarchical. But because of the experience of some people who work at that time, at the same time in that same school, we managed to create a sort of autogestionado Schuesseri organization. And in doing that, we found that humor and art played a very special role in opening up conversations. I'm going to just give one example of the humor we used, which was that we noticed that when we started the debates, we could either go forever or we could get into a tension that was unsolvable. So we decided to provide each of us who were in the assembly meeting with 4 cards of 4 different colors, 1 color green, 1 color red, 1 color yellow, 1 color black. And those had different meanings. The black meant something creative is going on. Let's bring that card up and let's work on it. The red meant you trespassed a frontier of being kind to other members. You need to shut up. The yellow was meant to say, maybe you're getting to a dangerous place, please keep your manners. And the green was, we are in agreement, let's work with that. And it sounds maybe silly to all of you, and you may think that this cannot be used where you're at. If this can't, maybe you can find an equivalent of what I'm saying, but the fact of having the actual cards of colors and showing them brought a lot of laughter and a lot of creativity in the very moment we were doing things. So that's interesting to think about. I think that in the interest of time, I have to pass the word. I just want to also say what I said at the beginning, which is that since in my experience, I first was a worker at a cooperative, and then I went into academia. That makes a difference for me when I work with people, because I keep in my body the feeling of what it means to be a worker in a cooperative, and also the way we do research in our team. Even though I cannot claim we are a cooperative, we are like a social solidarity economy group doing research with other social solidarity groups. So I think that's something that I can throw there and we can think about if there's time later on. Gracias.
Can I just say one more? Sorry, I just want to say one more thing about legality, that many of these groups work. Sorry.
Just for the interest of time, we want to have a couple of more questions.
I'll return back.
Round of answers. So let's hear Ercan, and then perhaps we will have time to hear because we're a bit over time. So Ercan, please go ahead.
Yeah. So the question of Tabo Hundgeburt, I can say yes. Cooperatives, if cooperatives are well organized, supported by a big part of the society, and connected organizational to the political decision structures, cooperatives can contribute to raise the quality of life. This is possible. This is what the case of Rojava teaches us. This society, I mean, the decision structures in a society, the people's councils in Rojava, they support cooperatives in establishing them. People are ready to do establishing them, and let's say buying the products or so. They are ready to do it, and then cooperatives would not have the question whether the product, the service will be, let's say, will be sought or not. And anyway, this is an important advantage of Rojava and North Kurdistan less, of course, where if cooperatives are founded, the most political structures, or let's say structures of Kurdish freedom movement, or even the official ones, they're ready to support them. And this is a big advantage. And yes, and this makes the things easier in that case. The society can decide to say, let's say, if you look to the economy and you have some areas which are very productive, the society can say, I will reorganize this area, and people are ready and prepared. Cooperatives can take over this area or part of area of this productive economic activity. Anyway, this is possible. Or if public or private companies are transformed in a carefully organized way to a cooperative, this is also possible. Then what is important is, this is the case with the cooperatives in Rojava. If there's a cooperative, if it produces a lot and sell a lot, then they give important part, the majority of the surplus, to the economy, to the general economy. There's there's a kind of law of cooperative. First, they take what they need for themselves, and then from the surplus, they give important part, I guess majority, to the cooperative movement, which takes the money and reinvests in new cooperatives or in education or another issue. So it's, let's say, ensured that the most surplus at least goes again back to the society. And another discussion in Rojava is, at least, or in the Kurdish freedom movement, that not all areas of the economy must be organized by cooperatives, but the majority is aimed. This is important. And this is in long term possible. We are still far away, but it's possible. This is what the revolutionaries and activists believe. However, Rojava is an example, it's also important, where let's say the sources are limited. It was the poorest area within the Syrian state until 2011, by far the poorest and the most de-industrialized one. Nevertheless, they shared the sources and what they have in a way that nobody suffered hunger and nobody is excluded from the main services. It's also an important example you can see. I don't say everybody has the same, that's not the case, but there's a good balance, and the people there work for it. And most have a view what happens with the sources. However, last sentence, in the end, everything, or the question whether it's possible or not, is also a question of political awareness, education, and commitment. And this is also a long process, organizational political process.
Thank you a lot. So I have 4 questions. I will read out the questions, at least having them heard is important, I think. And you will wrap up by answering the parts that falls on your shoulders. And the first question is from Adam Vurak. Sorry for mispronunciation. Do any of you have recommendations or language for how to calm anxieties about the work disappearing when a group's name or form changes? I hope it's understandable. There's a comment part, but I will read only this much because of time pressure. A second question from Ömer Pachal. Do people, I think this is for Ercan, do people undergo any training, education, ideological, political, practical training before joining these organizations or co-ops? Because these organizations are organizations and economic co-ops are not just a site of economy, go beyond that and attempt to create a new logic of economy and society. So how they create a new sense of community, subjectivity, more equal, less hierarchical by joining these organizations and co-ops. Another question from Padme Trujillo, sorry for mispronunciation. What do you consider is the place of, between the brackets, imagination in a context of resistance? And one last question in the chat box from Saraswati Subaraman. Sorry for mispronunciation. I have a question on horizontalism and hierarchy. Are there times where hierarchy can be supportive and supported? Are there hierarchies of, say, expertise that have relevance? And do you have experience supporting those intrinsic hierarchies without them becoming hierarchies of power? So each one of you have 2 minutes. I know that it's impossible to cover any part of this in 2 minutes. Just 2 minutes, then we will have to wrap up because we're already over time actually. So please start to remember once. First, Marcelo, because I cut you off. Sorry for that.
No,
Marcelo,
that's okay.
You go first. And
No, thank you. No, so let me
Marcelo,
address
te dono mis 2 minutos. You can speak for 4 minutes.
No, it's okay.
I can pass. Dale. Yeah, go ahead.
Okay. I want to comment on the hierarchies and horizontalism. What I witnessed in the Empresas Recuperadas that I worked at one even for a month, got mostly in the way, but and I was there a lot at many of them in my case studies. And what I noticed is that leadership is important. So there are groups of leaders. There's a frustration amongst the leaders that they want to create new leaders and they want to pass power. And the members of the cooperative, many of them don't want to. So there's this leftover from the past working at a hierarchical workplace that connects to the question of education. And what has to happen is a participatory conscientization has to happen, to use conscientization, a word from Freire. Right, so there has to be some kind of learning how to be democratic and learning how to be cooperative. And this happens in the Empresas Recuperadas, both ad hoc and by learning and struggle, as I've written about, but also through university programs and other organizations coming and helping as well. Organizations like Incluir, for example, that Anna is a part of, one of the founders at. So that's happening. But the hierarchies, they happen in an ad hoc level. That what happens is in a horizontal workplace like the Empresas Recuperadas, they delegate, they don't make decisions collectively on everything. They have regular assemblies, but only for high level strategic decisions. When it comes to decisions on the work, about the work on a day-to-day basis, the expert on that, task takes the leadership role. So, you know, in a print shop, and Chinaver, the print shop, if it's bookbinding question, it's the bookbinder, it's the head bookbinder that makes the decision and instructs the collective. So they're more, and then it disperses. And then it disperses and it goes on to another section of the project. So that's kind of how the production happens at a lot of these workplaces. It's dispersed. There isn't a boss telling them what to do or a manager, but the actual expert in the area becomes the temporary leader, and there's a temporary hierarchy that then disperses. So this is what I've witnessed at a small scale. So I'll pass on. So Anna, do you want to, or Ercan?
Shall I?
Yeah, please go ahead, Ercan. Yes.
About the question of the training, yes, there is a training before people join cooperatives, but in Rojava at least, it's not like that. People have a month-long education or training or so. It is not. Maybe it starts with several meetings where the principles are discussed, then let's say a weekend seminar, and then the practice starts. But what is important, there are always training accompanying the process after they have started. And the cooperative movement asks always the members of the cooperatives to join regularly meetings. I mean, meetings in the evening, or a weekend, or a week-long one. This is always possible. What I've seen in Rojava among, let's say, the activists is that many of them emphasize to join education, analyze, let's say, to step back from the political practice and go to an area where they can have a time of 1 week, 2 weeks, 1 month, where they can reflect what they have done. And they do it very regularly, and they say this helps us, otherwise things would go worse. About Eurocentric approaches, only some sentence. I mean, we have this discussion to not to fall in Eurocentric approaches or behavior for many years, and it's not easy. And the Kurdish freedom movement, they are also well connected with structures, groups in Europe, and it needs a lot of work and effort to let's say to disconnect us from Eurocentrism. It's not easy, because in Kurdistan and Turkey, Eurocentric approaches were, I would say, long time dominant among the left, and just in the last few decades there's a criticism on this. And I would say the Kurdish freedom movement has until now quite successful in developing its own thinking and approaches. Of course, the experience of the world, even Europe, is influencing it. This is normal. We are all part of one globe.
Well, thank you very, very, very much. First of all participants, those who joined us today here, and secondly to Anna, Marcelo, and Ercan for this breathtaking discussion. I myself enjoyed very much. I will just conclude the seminar with a couple of things. First of all, please go and follow CSCUNES Twitter, etc., social media accounts right now to hear more about what is going on and what will be coming up. Secondly, the third seminar is next week on Tuesday, 14th June. Please you go and you can simply once again join that one next week. And you will hear more and see more on our social media accounts. And another thing I would like to once again, on behalf of us all, once again thank you to Jalil Kaya. Thank you very much, Jalil, for your excellent work that you have been doing over time with not only for Rojava University, but particularly for that one. Rojava is, I will not say once again, Rojava has always been under attack, and once again it is intensifying. Turkish fascist Tayyip Erdogan is making clear menaces and threats against Rojava. Please get organized wherever you are in the world against one of the rare hopes of our century, of 21st century so far, to support and to remain in solidarity with this experience that is building hopes in our minds and in our actual physical world. I would say this much to conclude this seminar, and we're looking forward to meeting you all once again in the upcoming events of CSCUNES and the University of Rojava. The summer school goes on and seminars will be continuing. So once again, thanks, and see you all hopefully in the next session of these seminars.